Okay, so I'll stop after Naya's little portion. It's tiny in chapter 1, okay? Okay, oops. Alright, chapter 1, Southern Sudan, 2008. Going was easy. Going. The big plastic container held only air. Tall for her 11 years, Naya could switch the handle from one hand to the other, swing the container by her side, or cradle it in both arms. She could even drag it behind her, bumping it against the ground and raising a tiny cloud of dust with each step. There was a little weight going. There was only heat. The sun already baking the air, even though it was long before noon. It would take her half the morning if she didn't stop on the way. Heat, time, and thorns. Okay, they're describing right there carrying. So in this like picture here, this is somebody carrying the jug on their head, to go fill with water. That's what we're looking at. Okay, that's what they're talking about. When they're going, the plastic container is just empty. There's no water in it yet. Okay, so Naya. I'm just going to write going is easy. Okay, and I might draw a little picture of a jug. And it probably doesn't look like this, but that's okay. But then I can know what I'm talking about. Jug, water. I know it looks like a triangle, but okay. Now, Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva sat cross-legged on the bench. He kept his head turned toward the front, hands folded, back perfectly straight. Everything about him was paying attention to the teacher. Everything except his eyes and his mind. His eyes kept flicking towards the window, through which he could see the road home. Just a little while longer, a few minutes more, and he would be walking on that road. The teacher droned on with the lesson about the Arabic language. Salva spoke the language of his Dinka tribe at home. But in school he learned Arabic, the official language of the Sudanese government far away to the north. 11 years old, on his last birthday, Salva was a good student. He already knew the lesson, which is why he was letting his mind wander down the road ahead of his body. Salva was well aware of how lucky he was to be able to go to school. He could not attend the entire year because during the dry season, his family moved away from their village. But during the rainy season, he could walk to the school, which was only half an hour from his home. Salva's father was a successful man. He owned many head of cattle and worked as the village's judge, an honored, respected position. Salva had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Each boy reached the age of about 10 years. As each boy reached the age of about 10 years, he was sent off to school. Salva's older brothers, Arik and Ring, had gone to school before him. Last year, it had been Salva's turn. His 2 sisters, Akit and Agnath, did not go to school. Like the other girls in the village, they stayed home and learned from their mother how to keep house. So we read about people like that in our stories. Most of the time, Salva was glad to be able to go to school, but some days he wished he were still back at home herding cattle. He and his brothers, along with the sons of his father's other wives, would walk with the herds to the water holes, where there was good grazing. Their responsibilities depended on how old they were. Salva's younger brother, Quol, was just taking care of 1 cow. Like his brothers before him, he would be in charge of more cows every year. So as they're younger, they just take care of 1 cow. As they get older, more cows. Okay, make sure you're paying attention or you'll be lost. Before Salva had begun going to school, he had helped look after the entire herd, and his younger brother as well. The boys had to keep an eye on the cows, but the cows did not really need much care. They left plenty of time to play. Salva and the other boys made cows out of clay. The more cows you made, the richer you were. But they had to be fine, healthy animals. It took time to make a lump of clay look like a good cow. The boys would challenge each other to see who could make the most and best cows. So this was like their playtime. Other times they would practice with their bows and arrows, shooting at small animals or birds. They weren't very good at this yet, but once in a while they got lucky. Those were the best days, when one of them managed to kill a ground squirrel or a rabbit, a guinea hen or a grouse. The boys' aimless play halted, and there was suddenly a lot of work to do. Some of them gathered wood to build fire, others helped clean and dress the animal. Then they roasted it on the fire. None of this took place quietly. Salva had his own opinion of how the fire should be built and how long the meat needed to cook, and so did each of the others. The fire needs to be bigger. It won't last long enough. We need more wood. No, it's big enough already. Quick, turn it over before it's ruined. So this is a bunch of siblings trying to do one thing and they all have an opinion. The juices dripped and sizzled. A delicious smell filled the air. Finally, they couldn't wait 1 second longer. There was only enough for each boy to have a few bites, but oh, how delicious those bites were. Salva swallowed and turned his eyes back toward the teacher. Okay, so that whole time, he's what? He was daydreaming. He was in class, but that whole time he's just thinking back. So when it says he swallowed and turned his eyes back toward the teacher, he wished he hadn't recalled those times because the memories made him hungry. Milk. When he got home, he would have a bowl of fresh milk, which would keep his belly full until supper time. That's it, a bowl of milk to keep him full till supper. He knew just how it would be. His mother would rise from her work grinding meal and walk around to the side of the house that faced the road. She would shade her eyes with one hand, searching for him. From far off, he would see her bright orange headscarf, and he would raise his arm in greeting, like, "Here I am." By the time he reached the house, she would have gone inside to get his bowl of milk ready for him. Crack! The noise had come from outside. Was it a gunshot, or just a car backfiring? The teacher stopped talking for a moment. Every head in the room turned towards the window. Nothing. Silence. The teacher cleared his throat, which drew the boy's attention to the front of the room again. He continued the lesson from where he had left off. Then, crack, pop, pop, crack, ack, 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 ack. Gunfire. Everyone down, the teacher shouted. Some of the boys moved at once, ducking their heads and hunching over. Others sat frozen, their eyes and mouths open wide. Salva covered his head with his hands and looked from side to side in panic. The teacher edged his way along the wall to the window. He took a quick peek outside. The gunfire had stopped, but now people were shouting and running. "Go quickly, all of you," the teacher said, his voice low and urgent. "Into the bush. Do you hear me? Not home. Don't run home. They'll be going into the villages. Stay away from the villages. Run into the bush." He went to the door and looked out again. "Go, all of you, now!" The war had started 2 years earlier. Salva did not understand much about it, but he knew that rebels from the southern part of Sudan, where he and his family had lived, were fighting against the government, which was based in the north. So the north versus the south. Most of the people who lived in the north were Muslim, and the government wanted all of Sudan to become a Muslim country, a place where the beliefs of Islam were followed. So again, kind of like maybe those extremists that we talk about, like you believe in things we believe in or else. But the people in the south were of different religions and did not want to be forced to practice Islam. They began fighting for independence from the north. The fighting was scattered all around southern Sudan. And now the war had come to where Salva lived. The boys scrambled to their feet. Some of them were crying. The teacher began hurrying the students out the door. Salva was near the end of the line. He felt his heart beating so hard that its pulse pounded in his throat and his ears. He wanted to shout, "I need to go home. I must go home." But the words were blocked by the wild thumping in his throat. That's that adrenaline, that scary feeling. When he got to the door, he looked out. Everyone was running. Men, children, women carrying babies. The air was full of dust that had been kicked up by all those running feet. Some of the men were shouting and waving guns. Salva saw all of this with one glance. Then he was running too, running as hard as he could into the bush, away from home. Okay, I'm going to stop there and write something for Salva, and then I'll read chapter 2. Okay, so I think our most important thing to write at this point is, the kind of mentioning the war, that he's in school, has trouble focusing because he's thinking of all these things, okay? War, North versus South Sudan. Okay. Okay. Chapter 2, 2008, Naya. Naya put the container down and sat on the ground. She always tried not to step on the spiky plants that grew along the path, but their thorns littered the ground everywhere. She looked at the bottom of her foot. There it was, a big thorn that had broken off right in the middle of her heel. Naya pushed at the skin around the thorn. Then she picked up another thorn and used it to poke and prod at the first one. She pressed her lips together against the pain. So she's trying to get out what? A thorn, like a splinter, which tells us that what? She is barefoot. Okay. So I'm going to say, Naya, I think it's important to write that barefoot. Okay. Thorn. Okay, we don't have to write a lot, just very little bit. Okay, so all we've known so far about Naya is that she's going to get the water, okay, and on her walk, she then steps on a thorn stuck in her foot because she's barefoot, okay. All right, Southern Sudan, 1985, and this is both Southern Sudan, okay. Naya's not in the north or anything, southern. Okay, so we ended on him running into the bush away from his house. Boom! Salva turned and looked. Behind him, a huge black cloud of smoke rose. Flames darted out of its base. Overhead, a jet plane veered away like a sleek, evil bird. Simile. So a jet plane. He heard a boom. A jet plane goes out of sight. This is war. Okay? In the smoke and dust, he couldn't see the school building anymore. He tripped and almost fell. No more looking back. It slowed him down. Salva lowered his head and ran. He ran until he could not run anymore. Then he walked. For hours, until the sun was nearly gone from the sky. Other people were walking too. There were so many of them that they couldn't all be from the school village. They must have come from the whole area. As Salva walked, the same thoughts kept going through his head in rhythm with his steps. Where are we going? Where is my family? When will I see them again? Because he was at school, right? The teacher just said go. He didn't say go find your family. He said leave. And he's your age, 11.
Oh, wow.
The people stopped walking when it grew too dark to see the path. At first, everyone stood around uncertainly, speaking in tense whispers or silent with fear. Then some of the men gathered and talked for a few moments. One of them called out, "Villages, group yourselves by villages. You will find someone that you know." Salva wandered around until he heard the words, "Lune Arik, the village of Lune Arik. Here." Relief flooded through him. That was his village. He hurried toward the sound of the voice. A dozen or so people stood in a loose group at the side of the road. Salva scanned their faces. There was no one from his family. He recognized a few people, a woman with a baby, 2 men, a teenage girl, but no one he knew well. Still, it was comforting to see them. They spent the night right there by the road. The men taking shifts to keep watch. The next morning they began walking again. Salva stayed in the midst of the crowd with the other villages from Lune Arik. In the early afternoon, he saw a large group of soldiers up ahead. Word passed through the crowd. It's the rebels. The rebels, those who were fighting against the government. If you're a rebel, even like if you're a kid and you're a rebel, you go against the rules. Yeah, against the government. Salva passed several rebel soldiers waiting by the side of the road. Each of them held a big gun. Their guns were not pointed at the crowd, but even so, the soldiers seemed fierce and watchful. Some of the rebels then joined the back of the line, and now the villagers were surrounded. What are they going to do to us? Where's my family? It's the second time he's asked for his family. Late in the day, the villagers arrived at the rebel camp. The soldiers ordered them to separate into 2 groups, men in one group, women and children and the elderly in the other. Teenage boys, it seemed, were considered men, for boys who looked to be only a few years older than Salva were joining the men's group. Salva hesitated for a moment. He was only 11, but he was the son of an important family. He was Salva Mawian Dut Arik, from the village named for his grandfather. His father always told him to act like a man, to follow the example of his older brothers, and in turn set a good example for Kuol, the little brother. Salva took a few steps toward the men. So he's like, where do I go? Like, am I a child or do I go with the men? So he goes towards the men. Hey! A soldier approached Salva and raised his gun. Salva froze. All he could see was the gun's huge barrel, black and gleaming, as it moved towards his face. The end of the barrel touched his chin. Salva felt his knees turn to water. He closed his eyes. If I die now, I will never see my family again. Somehow this thought strengthened him, enough to keep him from collapsing in terror. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The soldier was holding the gun with only one hand. He was not aiming it. He was using it to lift Salva's chin so he could get a better look at his face. So he's got the barrel of the gun at his chin, and he's like raising his chin up. Over there, the soldier said. He moved the gun and pointed it toward the group of women and children. You are not a man yet. Don't be in such a hurry. He laughed and clapped Salva on the shoulder. Salva scurried over to the women's side. The next morning, the rebels moved on from the camp. The village men were forced to carry supplies, guns and mortars, shells, radio equipment. Salva watched as one man protested that he did not want to go with the rebels. A soldier hit him in the face with the butt of the gun. The man fell to the ground bleeding. After that, no one else objected. The men shouldered the heavy equipment and left the camp. Everyone else began walking again. They went in the opposite direction from the rebels, for wherever the rebels went, there was sure to be fighting. Salva stayed with the group from Lone Arik. It was smaller now, without the men, and except for the infant, Salva was the only child. That evening, they found a barn in which to spend the night. Salva tossed restlessly in the itchy hay. Where are we going? Where's my family? When will I see them again? It took him a long time to fall asleep. Even before he was fully awake, Salva could feel that something was wrong. He lay very still with his eyes closed, trying to sense what it might be. Finally, he sat up and opened his eyes. No one else was in the barn. Salva stood so quickly that for a moment he felt dizzy. He rushed to the door and looked out. Nobody. Nothing. They had left him. He was alone. Okay. All right. So, okay, on our next chapter 2, Salva, we know the war is happening. Okay. So I would say his next thing is he runs. Okay. Runs. Then walks. They get into groups with their villages. Okay. Then he goes with the women and children group because he's only 11. He's left alone. Okay. He keeps mentioning family. I'm going to add that. 3 times in 2 chapters he has said, "Where is my family? When will I see them again?"